Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar today on embracing technology during COVID-19. Um, this webinar has been organized by Shahid Bhagat Singh College Alumni Association, also known as Basicolans. Basicolans is a short form for for those of us who graduated from Shahid Bhagat Singh College. Basicolans is a community of and for alumni of Shahid Bhagat Singh College. And from time to time, we conduct knowledge sharing sessions for our community and guests. In this webinar, we will take a look at how technology is shaping business. We are joined today by Venkat Iyer, who is the Director of Cybersecurity at PwC, and our Karthik, a Senior Automation Associate with S&P Global. We'll start off the session with Venkat, who will be covering cybersecurity, and then hand it over to Karthik for robotic process automation. Venkat is deeply passionate about technology and has over 17 years of experience in the cybersecurity, digital and social media space, as well as analytics and mobility, having led teams across Asia, North America, Europe, and Africa. Prior to working with PricewaterhouseCoopers, he also served as marketing and strategy head for telecom and digital technologies at Tech Mahindra, and has also co-founded multiple startups in the digital space focused on cloud, security, and social media. He has recently co-authored a publication titled Cybersecurity Market, India Market 2019-22, What Lies Beneath, in partnership with Data Security Council of India, in which he gives detailed insights into how domestic demand for cybersecurity in India is going to evolve in the next few years. Venkat holds a master's in management studies finance from Jamnalal Bajaj, Mumbai, and a bachelor's degree in engineering from Mumbai University. Karthik, our second speaker, is a senior automation associate at S&P Global with over 14 years of experience in the data business. He has varied experience of working with technology teams, and he is currently working to bring automation solutions to the business using various tools, including RPA solutions. He is Blue Prism Level 1 certified. A fellow Basicolan, he is a self-professed technology geek and has diverse interests, including computer hardware, data analysis, and emerging technologies. He has been assembling his computers since he was a teenager and is a keen photographer. I welcome both of you and look forward to this session. Encourage all participants to use the Q&A tab on your Zoom interface to ask your questions. Our panelists will answer as many of the questions as possible within the time frame. Over to you, Venkat, to kick things off.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Kasturika, for that generous introduction, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Just give me a moment. I'm just going to share my screen and kickstart. Excellent. So, okay, just to check, are you able to see my screen, Kasturika?
Yes, I'm able to see. I think everyone should be able to see.
I can also see it.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Once again, thanks a lot, and welcome everyone to this seminar. It's been kind of 20 years since I had the good privilege of working with some of the most prominent scientists in the country. Right, this was 20 years back in Center for Development of Advanced Computing, where as a fresh graduate out of college, we were working on this telemedicine solution. Right, at that point of time, the intent of the solution, it's called Mercury, and of course, it's become very advanced now. You can Google it and figure it out on the CTAC website. At that point of time, the intent of this solution really was to facilitate remote teleconsultation. Right, so we deployed it in hospitals like AIMS, Breach Candy in Bombay, and so on. And really, the idea was you have these specialist doctors sitting out of here, and you have a lot of doctors and patients in tier 2, tier 3 cities, right? Those zamane mein, I'm talking about 20 years back. really the problem at that point of time was not so much on the development of the product, as it was about uh, going to the surgeons and the senior doctors and convincing them to actually adopt this technology, right? I mean, that was a bigger challenge at that point of time. And you can imagine, I was fresh out of college. I used to go there and tell them ki technology aazma ke to dekhiye, right? It'll be fun, right? That was then. Now, of course, we have COVID, right? And I think not just COVID. I mean, the recent technological developments have kind of made this a norm, right? It has kind of necessitated the use of technology, right? And as such, it becomes important for all of us to embrace technology, which kind of brings us to this topic, which is relevant for all of us, which is embracing technology during COVID-19. uh, we are all cognizant that probably a lot of you are attending seminars, right? There is a certain level of, as we understand, some level of fatigue that's coming into the ecosystem because we are spending a lot of screen time and so on, and we are extremely cognizant of the fact that your time should be well spent over the next 50 minutes or so, right? And we'll make sure that we keep it constructive and insightful. Uh, Broadly, we will cover the impact of COVID on us as individuals and businesses. We will also cover how is technology adapting to cater to these requirements. There are some concepts on technology specifically pertaining to security and automation that we will also touch upon, not to a very great depth, but as much as time permits. And then, of course, we have about 15 minutes or so for the Q&A session. At any point of time, like Kasturika rightly mentioned, whatever are your questions, जो भी आपके सवाल है, please to put it out in that chat box, right? All of us can see the chat box, and we'll try and pick up as many questions as we can, either on the go or at least in the Q&A session to follow. Perfect. So I'm just moving on to the next slide. So let's jump right in, right? All said and done, like I mentioned in the beginning, whether we like it or not, and hopefully a lot of us like it, right? Technology has become an indispensable part of our lives, right? Enriching it in many ways, right? So whether we are an individual, whether we are a family, whether we are a community or a business, it has implications for us. Communication, for instance, right? I mean, at this point of time, I'm sure because of the lockdown, a lot of people, irrespective of whatever age bracket they are in, elderly, they're able to reach out to people that they want to reach out uh, by way of communication. When you expand it into a larger subsection, like video conferencing and so on, you are able to kind of extend it to a larger forum. I mean, this webinar itself is one such example. Now, when we talk of communication, there are a lot of concepts that go into it. I mean, all of us are, I'm quite sure, aware of some of the pitfalls of video conferencing, for instance, which was published some time back. Some of them have been plugged, right? But then again, there are these concepts of scaling, right? Non-breakage, and the rendition in which we make it effective, which comes into the picture. Similarly, I have a 9-year-old daughter. Although I'm deeply passionate about technology, I was hoping that she would go physically to the school and learn, right? Till as much time as time permits. But then again, her school has started online. And I'm kind of beginning to appreciate the merits of that online learning as well. You have teachers, academicians, professors, all of them trying to adapt to this new style. uh, you have these challenges of how do you enrich content, right, to make it more effective, and then how do you store it, and then how do you disseminate it through technology, right? Those are some interesting challenges that come into the picture when it comes to the learning aspect. There is creation, right? Whether it is music, I mean, you have talked about, for instance, Bollywood, because of the lockdown, talking about the release of some of the films online, either on Netflix or Prime or any other forum, right? Which kind of facilitates a mass dissemination. I'm not too sure how many of you have heard the new rendition of Dil Chata Hai by a group of Bollywood artists. There is the new rendition of We Are the World, We Are the Children by a lot of artists. And although we are remote, a lot of this creativity has been happening, right? And probably even after lockdown, a lot of these will continue to be online, right? Because you have a lot of applications, a lot of things that make this very easy. Creation as well as broadcasting. And finally, last but not the least, the most important thing is engage, right? uh, whether you are into commerce, whether you are a chartered accountant, whether you are a lawyer, whether you are just running your bakery down the street, whether you are running a kirana store, जो भी आप कर रहे हो, whatever you are doing, if you are not engaging through this online medium, through this online channel, you are really missing out on a completely a potent channel for your business, right? And there are a lot of milestones, a lot of touch points which have over time kind of facilitated the movement of a lot of these activities online as well, right? So the takeaway from the slide is, whichever way you look at it, whether you're an individual, whether you're a family trying to communicate, whether you're a student who's studying somewhere in the country or overseas, whether you're an artist trying to create something, or whether you're running your own business, right? Technology is all permeating, right? You could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, you will have to bank on technology. On the other hand, you have suddenly a lot of people who are very young, who are in school, to people who are very elderly, right? Who are also kind of assimilating technology, right? So that's the kind of implication that technology is playing for us, right? Now this is at the top of, if I may call it, the top of the stack, the top of the pyramid, right? But this also has implications for business, right? I mean, in the previous slide, we kind of saw how everything around us is getting impacted, and at this point of time, we are feeling it in a very, very pronounced fashion. But इसका मतलब है कि जो business चला रहे हैं पीछे, the people who are doing the work in the background, they also have some kind of hard work to do, right? And so there are some questions that when we talk to business, some of these questions keep cropping up at this point of time. The most important, of course, in this is the entire concept around business resilience, right? Uh, Essentially, what that means is there could be 100 people on this call, there could be 1,000 people on this call, there could be 50,000 people on this call, right? The question is, how do we ensure it does not break, right? I could be a baker, right? Cake banata hoon, suddenly I go online, right? I need to make sure the orders keep coming in. I have some order management system and some supply chain kind of mechanism. I want to make sure it doesn't break. Agar break hota bhi hai, if it does break, then how do I ensure that I have a plan B, right? Pretty much like a business continuity kind of a plan, right? How does that make sure that business continues? So that is the concept of business resilience, on which a lot of focus is at this point of time. Number two is you work from anywhere and at any point of time. Earlier, this was applicable to binge watching on Netflix or Prime. मैं कहीं भी बैठ के उल्टा लेट के फिल्म देख रहा हूँ, right? But now that kind of a concept is also being extended to the workforce, to corporates, right? Uh, Whether I am on my laptop, whether I'm using my mobile phone, wherever I am at any point of time, I should be able to work. I should be able to create, right? So this is also pushing a lot of focus on technology, right? Uh, the third is this entire concept around a supply chain. I mean, imagine a situation jahan pe for this entire country, you had one big warehouse and you're trying to distribute a lot of things from this central spot without any local nodes. right? Obviously it's bound to fail, especially when you have lockdowns, especially when for some situation you're not able to move fluidly, or in other normal situations as well. This kind of a centralized mechanism will not work. Now if you start extending it to the online world, there is a lot of information, a lot of people going online. Unless I change that supply chain, unless I do some transformation, unless I distribute it either by way of some technological terms like, let's say, content delivery, mirroring, and so on and so forth, uh, even the online supply chains are bound to break. So this reliance on supply chain is the third talking point. The fourth one is resource optimization. I mean, you must be hearing a lot of things about cost optimizations. How do I optimize my resources? And I'm not going to venture in this territory too much because it has a lot of elements of automation, robotic process automation, and so on. And I'm not going to steal Karthik's thunder on this subject. I will let him cover some elements of this. But essentially, how do I control my costs, whether it is an institution like us, whether it is a business, and how do I kind of deliver a lot more with an improved, optimized workforce is definitely one of the technological considerations. And last but not the least, imagine I am a restaurant, and today I'm in a position where people are not able to come to my restaurant, right? uh, Even though I have minimal physical contact, how do I still continue the business, right? I could be a hotel, I could be in the hospitality industry, the tourism industry. How do I still continue my business with a low touch point, right? Not in terms of technology, but in terms of me not being able to cater to these requirements physically, right? So essentially, in a nutshell, what this slide is simply saying is that there are implications for business, but if you start looking at business resilience, right, under the hood, you have concepts like business continuity process, right? If you start looking at work from anywhere or anytime, you have concepts of analytics and user behavior, right? I mean, let me give you a classic example on this one. If you are doing a banking transaction, let's say at 1 a.m. in the morning, which usually I'm assuming one would not, and it's like a high value transaction, if there is an analytics engine working in the background, and if the bank is doing its fraud analytics well, you should get a call confirming whether you did do that transaction. If you are not getting that call, I think you should stop transacting with that bank, because it essentially means they don't have a few controls which should be there, as an example, right? So there are these concepts that come into there. Supply chain transformation, if you start extending it to, let's say, blockchain, and then some concepts like that, right? A few of those things become intuitive. Resource optimization, again, you have concepts of RPA, AI, ML, right? How can I use these to optimize my existing assets and resources? And finally, there is this entire thing around the low touch business model, which in a way has everything to do with creativity, right? What I mean by that is, अगर मेरा एक restaurant business है, and I'm even a street vendor, or I'm just a florist, if I have to go online, how do I put my menu online and put it in a way which is attractive to everyone around me, right? How can I leverage technology for that, right? So really, these are the implications that one has for business, right? Which essentially also means that the conversations are changing, right? So people are no longer talking about technology. People are not saying I want big data, machine learning, AI, and so on. But they're saying, by virtue of these changes, can I trust the ecosystem, right? You must have heard about concepts around privacy. If this is an institution, and I were to put everything online, right? Will it be safe? If there is an admin who is going to work from home, can this person be not trusted, but will he not break anything deliberately or indeliberately, right? So that's all about the trust angle, and there are a lot of concepts of cyber privacy and so on that go into it. I spoke about resilience, right, which is continuing with your business even when things break. What is plan B, C, D, and so on and so forth, right? Uh, and finally, the last point is on enablement. Now, there are concepts like cloud, which are coming in, right? Cloud is like a big hot selling concept at this point of time, because a lot of workloads are going onto the cloud, right? If I have to be able to cater to a lot of requirements remotely, a lot of people working remotely, what is the best way of delivering that, right? So essentially, the takeaway from this slide is in a lot of our business conversations with our clients, people are not talking necessarily about technology, but they're asking these relevant questions. How do I build trust, resilience, and concepts like enablement in my ecosystem, right? What I'm simply doing here is starting from the top, right? Implications for us. I have moved into the business implications. Now I'm moving into hence what are the questions that businesses are asking. And finally, a little bit of technology, right? I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But let's say in the pre-COVID-19 era, there were some questions and some technological aspects which were kicking in, and that is kind of changing, right? So I can have my laptop or I can have my mobile device. I could be earlier. I used to be inside my corporate ecosystem or inside my university or organization. Now I'm saying I need to use my MacBook outside. I need to use my latest iPhone or Android phone outside, and hence there are concepts like zero trust architecture, which are coming in. There are concepts like virtual desktop infrastructure, which are coming into the ecosystem. Earlier, whether it's my admin staff, my employees, my students, my professors, they were inside a controlled ecosystem. Now they are all scattered, right? So the concept of user behavior monitoring, for instance, is coming into the picture. And again, this is not just technology, right? This is an art, right? I mean, trying to figure out what are anomalous behaviors, right? It's an interesting part of it. Similarly, questions around cloud adoption, right? Like I mentioned, what is the best way? Earlier, everything used to be in my data center or in my facility. We have different organizations which are at different stages of maturity, right? क्या मुझे cloud use करना चाहिए? Will my business work if I use that? Um, what kind of measures can I put in there? What kind of analytics can I put in there for customizations to ensure I hit my target users well, right? Those are the kind of questions. And lastly, people are not saying eliminate all risks in my ecosystem, right? I mean, they have flipped the pyramid and said, पहले तो BCPDR used to be like insurance, right? होगा तो देखा जाएगा, right? Now they're saying पहले you plan for that, right? Plan for BCPDR first, plan for resiliency first, and if that breaks, then we will kind of make sure that the rest of it is taken care of, right? So broadly, if you look at the way technology is moving, there is something that is apparent to us. There are some implications that people like me and Karthik sitting in the background have to take, right? Both in terms of how we are managing this and in terms of some of the conversations that we are having with our businesses, which also means there are some technological changes that are happening, right? So this really was what I wanted to cover. And since I am cognizant of time, we also have a Q&A session after this. I'm going to just take a pause for a few minutes and try and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, there,
Uh,
there is one. So
yep.
let me just go over that. So, and I think you've partly answered it. And I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, which is coming from Drew. It's like, what are the new threats that we're seeing in light of COVID-19? And you covered the banking aspect very specifically, but in general, what are you seeing when it comes to the kind of threats in light of these new in COVID-19 environments that we have?
Yep. That's an excellent question, and I think it's an important question because it has deep implications for all of us, right? And Dhruv, thanks for asking this question. I've covered some elements of the banking industry, but let me just try and quickly answer this question. So, what are the key challenges today? I'm sure all of us receive a lot of junk mails these days, right? Because we are online, right? So a lot of phishing messages, right? I mean, these are nothing but trying to kind of incite us into doing something that we should not be doing, right? That's number one. And number two, a lot of us are using a lot of passwords, right? Again, I'm not going to go into specifics of companies, but we are using passwords all over the place, right? Now, the question is, especially since you asked a question about banking, we are beginning to talk about putting in certain controls, like, for example, multi-factor authentication, right? Where you just don't have a password, but you have a second factor authentication, which kind of puts an added layer of security on top of it, on top of this. Third is, I mean, try to think of it. Even your bank employees, even your call center associates, your admins, everybody is working from home and trying to render the service to you, right? I mean, it's a complicated thing because you're trying to do all of this through your end device. Earlier, you used to come to the office and work on desktops or whatever, but now you're doing it remotely, right? So endpoints, right? It becomes a very important thing to safeguard, right? And there are all kinds of attacks, all kinds of people trying to target these. So there is a lot of work happening around. If I would answer your question through these three aspects, right? One is phishing as a challenge. Number two, things around passwords, multi-factor authentications, and so on. And number three, ensuring awareness, right? Since we are using our endpoints a lot more, how are we aware of what we are doing on it, and being a little more careful, if I may call it, about using it, right? So I guess I hope that kind of answers your question, right? One quick question that has come from Badal Kumarji, and he's saying, how can technologies be helpful for libraries in rural India? I'm going to answer this quickly, very question very quickly before I hand it over to Karthik. But that's a very, very beautiful question because, like I mentioned, I started off my life in CDAC, where we were trying to work around, uh, uh, you know, giving healthcare to rural India, education to rural India, and so on. Uh, I think at this point of time, there is a lot of work happening around this, right? It's not just video conferencing, but a lot of work going around. How can I create content, right, which engages people remotely? I mean, like, for example, this webinar, for it to be effective, I mean, there has to be some level of engagement. It has to be reasonably rich in content, right? And this permeates into the education sector as well, right? So one is the technology part of it, which has everything to do with how can I scale. Right? Number B, how can how can I ensure there is no breakage, right? Whether it is a live session, whether it is a webinar, whether it is video conferencing, how does it not break? Number three, everything around content. How is it safeguarded, right? So there are a lot of cyber concepts that we are working around. So it need not be just, for example, schools or something, right? It could be a university which has a lot of innovation, a lot of proprietary material which has to be sometimes shared between professors or research institutions, right? How do you safeguard that? And number four, concepts around privacy, right? I mean, how do I ensure I'm not putting in things out there which can be deemed as private, right? So a lot of work happening around that, Badalji. But I'm cognizant of time, so I'm going to leave it there. But we can have an offhand conversations. There are a few more questions, right? But I'm going to hand it over to Karthik in the interest of time, and probably circle back to these questions towards the end. Over to you, Karthik.
Thanks, Venkat. That is actually pretty insightful. I also got quite a bit out of that session. Now, as Venkat has pointed out, there is an aspect of automation which is coming into this space, especially in line of COVID-19. Now, before I get into that, we have to actually step back and see what was happening pre-COVID-19 and uh, have an understanding of what is robotic process automation will be a little bit more clearer. Just one housekeeping issue. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Karthik.
All
We can
right.
see your screen and we can hear you loud and clear.
That's great.
Yep.
So um, I'll be covering a few things here as to what is automation, how it is done, and then by the time we get to the why, hopefully all of you would be very clear as to why businesses are saying, okay, let's start doing automation and putting it in our business. So I'll start with the what aspect and I'll take three examples from your everyday life so that you get a understanding of what is automation. So the three examples are, one is a web form. The next one is a, um, uh, what's this? Let's put up a pointer. Right. Yeah. One is a web form. Then is we'll do automated emails, and then something which is becoming very popular these days, which is a chatbot. Right. So uh, everybody has experienced a web form whenever they're doing a purchase online. Whenever you go to your favorite e-commerce website, you fill in your details, you add your shipping details, you add a billing address, and then you make a payment, and uh, the transaction is complete. And I want to draw your attention to one specific aspect of this, which is just the address, shipping address, and the billing address. And some online cards will allow you to say, copy the shipping address as billing address. This is a very simple form of automation. And what somebody has done is they've actually written a piece of code and just given you a checkbox. And when you press that checkbox, automation is happening. So this form of automation can actually be added in data entry forms for a lot of businesses, but it requires some level of coding. So this automation has existed for a really long time, and all of you have experienced this. Another one is automated emails, something that you all would have received when you signed up for this webinar. So usually there is an event which will happen. In your case, when you signed up for this presentation, that was the event which triggered something. It could also be, as we talked about in the shopping example, you completed a purchase, that was the event, and then you get a support email. Or let's say you supported an IT help desk or a HR help desk, and they have completed their support, and then you get a support email after that. So an email would be generated by the machine, which will say, hi, how are you doing? This is your order details. And we will be sending your shipping details very soon. And in some cases, depending on the type of business, they can even track an email if it was opened or not opened and send a follow-up email saying, hey, I'm not sure if you saw this email, you might want to take a look at this. So this kind of automation is usually handled by something known as a database. Just I want you to keep that in your mental mind pocket, and we'll cover that slightly later. This has also been around since the 1970s. It's not new. Like database automation is really old, extremely robust, and highly scalable. Next example is that of chatbots, which is getting extremely popular now, and this is where we start to see sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning starting to come into play. And this is where people are saying, hey, this kind of automation may start replacing humans, or this kind of automation is going to be very extensively used. Now, I'm going to use an example of a booking of a room in hotels for everybody to understand. So whenever you make a booking, if you were to call the front desk, you'll give the following details. I'll say, I want to book a room on X date. This is the type of room that I want to book. I'm going to be staying for so many days. And they may ask you if you have any special preference, like do you want vegetarian meals only, or do you need an extra bed, and other details like that. Now, for a human, this is a really easy task. Now, let's see if we were to move this to a chatbot, what would happen? So you could actually trigger a chatbot and ask any of these questions. So you can say, I want to make a booking. I want to reserve, make a booking. Do you have rooms available on X date? Now, for a machine, these questions are not the same. So what it's going to do is it's going to run all of these questions through an algorithm. And then the algorithm is going to spit out a probability score saying this probably means this. So I may actually have a set of questions and answers in my repository. And let's say my question is, I want to make a booking, is the way I've stored it, then that's 100% probability. And then the algorithm will go through the different questions and spit out a number. Once I have this number, I can then configure the chatbot to say if the probability score is above 65%, just follow the booking path and get the details from the customer, and the booking is complete. If it is above 50% but below 65%, I can configure the bot to say, hey, I'm not sure what you want, but do you want to make a booking? And give a yes, no option. And if it says yes, it'll follow the booking path. If it's no, then it would say, hey, would you like to connect to somebody in our front desk? And if it is below 50%, I can configure the chatbot to say, sorry, I do not understand what is your request. You mind asking a question again? So you can see that this kind of feature can be very easily implemented. And in COVID times, we're starting to see this in IT support and HR support, where your list of questions for logging a ticket for IT support is very straightforward, saying, hey, my computer's not working, my Excel's not working. Then they would ask you, what's your computer name? And if you're on a VPN, what VPN are you accessing? And similarly with HR support, they would ask, you could ask, hey, what are my leave policies now that I'm working from home? What are my working hour requirements? Do my shift policies continue to apply, or are they more flexible? Now, these are all FAQ questions which are stored in one single document, and that can be simply taken over by a chatbot. So this is like real, this is happening as we speak, and businesses are offloading all of these repetitive tasks to chatbots. And by now, you would have noticed that this is just a series of yes, no statements working together. And when you have these yes, no statements working together, they make pretty advanced models. And when I mean advanced, I don't mean complicated. So if you take a look at this tree, I mean, it looks pretty advanced, but if you follow each node, it's just branching out one after the other. So you can get to some pretty advanced stuff. And even in case of that hotel booking engine or the chatbot, it can simulate that you are actually having an interaction with a human being just by the way it's following the yes, no statements. So now this brings us to how automation is done. And uh, we'll cover one very specific aspect of the low code and no code solutions. But so far, I've told you that you can actually do this using database automation and custom software. But this is where our primary focus will be. So if you remember the example of the automated email, which was being sent out, that is a form of database automation. It's really old. It really works. The underlying infrastructure manages all the automation, and it's done by something known as stored procedures or jobs. Uh, if you made custom software like the form that you entered, you could write custom software. You could make a custom chatbot as well. You could bring AI ML models into it and make a product and solve. But what is really getting popular now is these emergence of these low code and no code solutions, wherein they are sort of modularized and they have objects. And what you need to do is when you access that tool can actually hook up to various uh, uh, tools. Like it can connect to productivity tools like your Outlook or Word and interact with it just as a human would. And you just have to make sure that you enter the logic statements. So a person can just say, okay, I don't know how to code, but I can make logic statements. So you make the logic statements. Then the tool converts all of those logic statements into code, and then the solution is up and running. So the entire solution is called a robot. So let's take an example of what is happening as we speak in terms of COVID-19. So there is a new regulation where the regulator says that we're going to give loan waivers for businesses, and a banking service industry has to process these applications. So these applications could come in by way of somebody just dropping it off in the front desk of a bank. They could call in. They may email. They may email these requests. They may send a scanned copy via email. They may fax it to you, and the banking executive has to take all of this detail, fill up some sort of platform, then review the application, and finally give a loan waiver. Now, let's see how a robot would actually help in this case. So what the robot would do is it can actually go ahead and extract information from the application which has come in, yeah, uh, using OCR or optical character recognition technology, and then fill out a form. It can be hooked up to an IVR system, get all the information, again, fill up a form. Or even if there's a designated email ID where all of these applications are going, it can go monitor that email ID, get any attachments which are applications as attachments, extract that information, And then it can even go and process the application and keep it in a ready state for the banking executive to just come and say, okay, I have seen everything. I just make sure that this person qualifies and then give a loan waiver. So in this case, what it does is it reduces the time it takes to process an application. And this is particularly important now because the number of applications are actually skyrocketing. And if you were to do it manually, you'd have a really long wait time for the customer. And in some cases, it may be too late for them because the business may go under by the time this application gets processed. So in this case, you've actually sped up a technology deployment. And if you were to say write custom code and solve this problem, it may not be at the same pace at which you want it to get done. So now you would start to see a sense of why RPA is starting to become very popular, and this kind of automation is getting a lot of press. So you'd see that there is an emergence of this low code and no code environment, and a lot of businesses have these legacy software or outdated data entry systems which now need to be retired, and maybe due to some regulatory requirements they need to support two platforms, so they're actually doing the same data entry in two different places. So these low code environments can actually hook up to both of these environments, and you can do some data entry in one place and it'll fill up the data in both of those places. And it can also connect to these productivity tools, so it can do some pretty uh, creative stuff. And one of the things you would have noticed by now is that there has been a decline in the service industry, unlike manufacturing where efficiency has been going up. In the service industry, efficiency has actually been going down because of some of the reasons I mentioned. Plus, there's something known as feature creep, wherein you keep adding more features and then some of it becomes redundant. Sometimes you're adding the same piece of data in two different places. So because of that, we are seeing a decline in the efficiency of the service industry. And lastly, this is not an exhaustive list. There is a fall in computer pricing. Venkat had mentioned that you could spin up a server or a virtual machine, and, and there are some security aspects to it, but the cost of actually having a server space has now come down very significantly than what it was in the past. So what it's actually doing is actually optimizing human effort. And what we noticed is if you were going to do that, if you remember the banking regulator example I took, a lot of human effort was wasted in just getting to the decision making. Like they were copy pasting data from an application and putting it into a platform. But now all of that decision is taken away and the human is just kept to solving problems and using what they do best, which is using their creativity and having a more human experience. So I'm just going to sort of, in light of the time that we have, I'm just going to keep this, wrap it up here. And some of the things that businesses are considering, and like anything else in business, you'd have to see what is the cost of deploying this technology, what is the return on investment, the speed of deployment, and the dynamic nature of input and output. So if in our case of the banking regulator, the cost of say building out new software solution may have been exorbitant, uh, and it may not even have a return on investment because this is a very specific pandemic specific situation. So by the time you build the software, you may have to throw it away because the pandemic may be over or the use case for that solution is very short lived. And another thing over here is we needed a very fast deployment. So you needed something to get going. We needed a solution yesterday, as somebody in the banking sector would say, because my number of applications is just like a tsunami and I can't handle it. So I needed a solution yesterday. So in this case, the speed of deployment is very high. So in this case, robotic process automation with this low code environment would be very helpful. And lastly, it's the dynamic nature of the input. So if your nature of input is very fixed, let's say you're only going to get input in form of an Excel file or a web form, then it's fine. But in our case, you would see that there were multiple ways that somebody could apply for a loan waiver. So that makes the nature of the input very dynamic. Now, you could say that there may be a requirement to actually send out an email to the person saying, hey, you have got a loan waiver. So that's an additional variable dynamic nature of the output. Or you may have a requirement to say send out an email not only to that person but also to the regulator, and maybe update the regulator's platform with this application. So that's, again, there's a dynamic nature to this output as well, which becomes perfect for this kind of a low code no code environment, which can just connect to all of these tools and have a solution quickly deployed. So, with that, we'll just open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Ye- So I'm just, I mean, we have about 10 minutes or so. So I'm just going to
Mhm.
read out a few questions that have come out here. Karthik, thanks for that capsule. So one is clearly around, you mentioned a few things about low code and no code,
Mhm.
right? And there is a question that has come up from Priyanka, which says, uh, do people without coding background, what kind of I mean, are those skills people with a commerce background or an arts background, what do they need to get into cybersecurity automation, what does it mean in terms of job prospects for them, right? So that's one
Yeah,
question. I'll just spend 30 seconds on this before I hand it over to Karthik, right?
sure.
So Priyanka, just for I mean, just for everyone's info. So, like I mentioned in my session as well, there is a layering of technology at the bottom. But increasingly, what we are seeing is, I mean, even if you read that beautiful article by the World Economic Forum, right, which talks about skills of the future,
Mhm.
increasingly there is a lot of focus which is going into how do we design such things which are easily consumable by different sets of people of all age groups. Number one, there are certain concepts in cybersecurity, especially those around privacy, right, which are subjects of interpretation, which probably somebody with a commerce or an arts background is sometimes being able to do a lot better than somebody with a deeply technical background, right? Again, when it comes to analytics and so on, you have visualization scientists, right, who need to understand how to grapple around with a lot of data and look for interesting interpretations, how to pick out what's relevant, right? So definitely there is a lot of scope, right? And it need not all be technical, right? And at least in my experience, in my team, I have a lot of people from varied backgrounds whom we respect, right? And who are required in many situations. What's your experience been like, Karthik?
Yeah, so I'll start off with I am not somebody from a technical background and I am doing this job. So that's sort of a testament to the fact that you don't need to have a technical background to get into this space. You need to have a logical mindset, and if you have a learning attitude, you can actually get into this space and upskill yourself and learn these technologies over time and make a career in this. You don't have to be somebody who should feel shortchanged that you're from a commerce background and you can't do this.
Yep, absolutely. Anuj Mathur asks, what are your views in case, since we're talking about technology, what are your views in case the vaccine comes first and one has already invested in technologies such as the cloud? Uh, so essentially, Anuj, I think it's an interesting question you ask, because I think all of us are aware that a lot of conversations that we are having at this point of time revolves around cost, right? I mean, all in all jobs, in all spheres of life, there is an element of cost, right? uh, so there are two aspects to this. One is, what investment do I make? Agar मैं investment नहीं करता हूँ, let's say I don't do a specific investment, then I might become redundant. That is one part of the equation, right? The other part of the equation is, मैं investment करता हूँ लेकिन I have to do it in a phased manner, like, right, like for example, it's not like I'm going to do some big bang investment, right, and then wait to see what happens. It can be staggered, right? But whichever way you look at it, there is more movement towards some of these technologies, whether it is automation that Karthik spoke about, or cloud, or investments in ensuring that you are secure by design, right? See, without taking names, I'll just take an example. There are some applications, some some kind of businesses which were not built for scale initially, right? So certain basic concepts were missing, right? But then they built it as they went along, right? So that's one way of looking at it, but then you have to do a lot of course correction, right? So really, to answer your question, in summary, one, yes, you will have to take that jump, right? But maybe in some situations do it in a staggered manner so that there is a commensurate ROI,
Yeah,
right? Difference between AI, ML,
it's
and
too big.
others. Karthik, you want to take that in 2 minutes?
No, no,
You
I
want to
can't
have a
take
go
that.
at that?
It's a really vast topic. Maybe we can have a discussion offline on that. But
Yep.
very specifically to Anuj's question, one of the ways that instead of looking at it saying whether it give a desired outcome output or not, is to see if in the long run can you actually be looking at talent in form of return on investments, and you're not restricted to where your business is located. So if you could actually have your talent be in another city or even another country and you can get the best talent, well, this infrastructure, if you are making an investment in today, will actually help you get in the future, which you may not have actually thought of before this COVID-19 situation.
Absolutely. One more question I'm just reading out, which comes from Nikhil. It says, in automation, is personalization a casualty? And where do you draw the line between what for instance, a machine can do or people can do? Any quick reactions to that,
Yeah,
Karthik?
there are two aspects to it, and it depends on the deployment of technology. And if any of you have actually picked up an IVR system, that's an automated solution. And depending on how the technology is deployed, you may actually have a uh, hair pulling experience, and you may spend 20 minutes before you talk to a human and still not have your problem solved and repeat all your questions which you have gone through the IVR. Or you could actually have an experience where in under 2 minutes you're talking to a human and they're resolving a query, and in 4 minutes the entire call is over. Now it depends on how the technology is deployed. If it is deployed well, then you can have an amazing human experience, and the person will feel the seamlessness, or the technology will fall to the background. But if it's done poorly, you will not only have a bad technology experience, you will actually have a bad human experience as well. So it totally depends on how somebody is deploying it. What we will see is some of the low end copy pasting jobs uh, to be offloaded to machines, because now we have the technology, but we will see more human experience being emphasized. So if you're somebody in sales, I don't want you to sit behind a CRM software doing some data entry. I want you to be out in the field or talking to customers, getting me more business or getting more client feedback.
Yep, yep. One last question I'm just going to take very quickly before I hand it back to Kasturika, because I think we are pretty much there in terms of time.
Hmm.
So Rajneesh Kochar asks, what are the current debate with the current debate of meeting platforms like Zoom not being safe? What are the precautions we can take while using them? Very quickly, to answer your question in 30 seconds, I mean, this is like a huge subject, right? I mean, I can spend quite some time talking about this, but inherently, whatever application that one is talking about, there are certain basic precautions that one has to take. I mean, certain things can be like putting in passwords, using multi-factor authentications, not just for any video conferencing applications, even for our banking applications and so on. That's one thing. There are other technical subjects like encryptions, right? Ensuring that some of the installables are not infected with malware and so on, which I can labor on. But I think, like I said, in the interest of time, Rajneesh, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll try and answer your questions. Kasturika, there are a few more questions, but I think
We're out of time.
yeah, we'll have to hand it back to you.
So if you have another 5-7 minutes, we're okay if because we do have a lot of interesting questions. So I leave it up to you if you can
Yeah,
spare
so
five
I
seven
can I can take
minutes.
Achin's
That would
question,
be
and
great.
Venkat, you can join in, and
Yep.
then even Gaurav's question is pretty good. So Achin asked the question: is it possible to exit an investment in automation and the cloud? The answer is yes and no. It depends on your deployment. So one of the biggest names in cloud is AWS. So the way they have configured it is you can turn on servers as and when you require and turn it off once the usage is not there. So, but most people who come into an AWS environment actually forget to turn off their cloud solutions, and they actually have a bigger bill than actually setting up the infrastructure themselves.
Yep.
So you need to know what you're dealing with. So
Right.
you can turn off your cloud anytime and scale it down based on requirement and scale it up as your requirement is there. And similarly with automation, as Venkat had pointed out, you just go iteratively into your investments rather than going all in, because some of the vendors out there are good at one solution whereas other vendors are good at another. So it'll it's you need to think more in terms of solutions rather than the low code environment that you're deploying.
Absolutely. I'm in agreement with Karthik on that question. Essentially, everything is going in the as a service model, pay as you go kind of model, and that kind of permeates into a lot of spheres of what we do, right? And that is entirely possible. I mean, the ability for one to exit, right, is there or facilitated by some of these models, changing business models. Yes, absolutely. Uh, there is something more about what are the skills of the future. I think we answered that question in some ways. Uh, Saurav is asking, this is out of the line. How do you think the future office workforce is going to look like? Are companies able to completely switch to no office environment? I will have a very, very quick go at this, Saurav. I think a lot of clients, I mean, I meet up to a lot of clients every day. So I think earlier this was a very Western concept, things like teleworking and so on, which did not have a lot of uptake in India. But now I think even Indian organizations are very closely looking at it. Like I mentioned in the earlier module, there are these 3 4 concepts which come into the picture, saying can the ecosystem be trusted? Is there enough resilience and enablement put into it? As long as we address this, yes, there is a lot of uptake happening along these lines, and a lot of organizations, you must have read in the media as well, people are looking at how they can kind of facilitate more working from home as we move forward wherever possible. Most definitely.
Yeah, let's take Gaurav's question. I think I've already asked it. It says many times chatbot or automation in customer service is not great and leads to customer dissatisfaction. So, what can businesses do to have a great customer experience? Again, and I'll uh, take a leaf out of Kasturika's page here, and she says, you need to have design thinking and have human empathy when you're building the solution out. Don't just say, okay, we have the technology, just throw it. Think it through, because if you don't, then that's when you have these really gut wrenching experiences with technology. And it's a worse of human experience rather than just simply giving it to a call center executive to directly talk to them.
Yep.
So solution thinking, yeah. Go ahead.
Yep. Shikhar Kumar, a question from Shikhar Kumar. An interesting question. Are econometric tools such as regression and hypothesis testing helping in learning cybersecurity or automation? A very good question, Shikhar. Even before you enable organizations to take decisions, right? I mean, the question that the management will ask us is, what is the ROI, right? What is the
Yeah.
return on investment, right? And a lot of these techniques that you have typed out here, Shikhar, are helping us in answering these questions. Like, for example, if I were to say something is risky from a cybersecurity perspective, the question is, how risky is it, right? It doesn't help if I tell you ये बहुत risky है, right? It doesn't answer anything, right? बहुत risky can be anything, right? But if I could kind of quantify it, right, through some value at risk kind of models using some kind of regression techniques, that adds a lot of value, and that is a subject that we very frequently use in some of our computations, and to kind of quantify some of these things. Yep. Perfect.
Right.
I
Yep.
think we can wrap up now. Just one final question, and we will call this a wrap. is about education, because a lot of parents now are teaching their kids at home using
Hmm.
online tools. Where do you see from an is there scope for automation in schools, for instance, say testing, etc.? And what is the security scenario like? For instance, there's you're literally allowing people to look into people's homes, and especially where children are involved. So this is
Mhm.
a two-pronged question to both. What is the role and extent of which this can be implemented? The future of online education in schools.
Yep,
This
yep.
last question, and then
Yep, and that's an excellent question. Like I said, mm, there are two elements to this. One is about the security on the infrastructure part of it, and the second part of it has everything to do with privacy, right? I mean, the question that you ask is, I mean, it has shades of both, right? One is,
Mhm.
of course, I can be into education. I could be running some content. I could even be, like I mentioned, doing some kind of innovation, some kind of research, right? I mean, there is this famous case study about one of the schools in the US where a lot of
Yeah.
healthcare information of students were out in the open, right? So there is this aspect of security, right? And we are working with a lot of academicians, a lot of universities in trying to see how this can be delivered seamlessly. That's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is about privacy, right? I mean, and you're right. It kind of gives us a peek into our households, right? Uh, and there are many, and plus there is also an interaction with parents, like for example, right? I mean, there are applications to ensure there is a login for parents, there is a login for students, there is a login for contractors, there is a login for other academicians, professors, and so on and so forth, right? And there is a lot of work happening around all these things. Like I mentioned, some of these things have been thrust on some universities because the situation has forced it, right? But there are a lot of concepts around role-based access controls, around encryptions, right? Which we are using to kind of or even user behavior analysis, right? Which we are trying to use to address some of these problems. Privacy is a completely separate subject.
Mhm.
I mean, feel free to reach out to me because it'll take a lot more time for me to answer that question. Yeah.
I have nothing to add
Yeah.
here. I mean,
Uh,
Venkat's done a very good job.
all right. So
well,
then
yep.
we'll wrap it up there. Would you, if somebody wants to reach out to you, how would they reach out to either one of you?
No,
Yes. So
absolutely. I think, yeah.
go ahead,
My
Venkat.
email ID is there. Uh, and feel free to reach out to me in any which way you want. Uh, I think I'll be happy to take questions and engage in offline conversations as well.
Sure.
So
Karthik.
then what we can do is, if anyone has any questions, we'll forward those questions to you, that are those questions that have
Sure.
not been answered, and then you guys can take a shot at it whenever
Sure.
you're
Sure. And you
available.
can reach out to me at rkarthik.info. There's a contact form there.
All right.
Just
So
fill out
thank
details
you
there.
so much to both of you. These are very vast topics, and you have tried to. You've been very patient in trying to explain these very complicated and technical subjects in very lay terms. So thank you both for your time and for taking out additional time over and above the
Thank,
allotted time. So, thank you to all participants for joining in. We will be hosting another webinar next Sunday, and we'll be sending details out to those very soon. In the meanwhile, after you close this webinar, you will see a feedback form. So please feel free to leave as descriptive a feedback as possible, so that we can continue to improve our webinars. We're pretty new to this game. So thank you, everyone, again, and have a great Sunday.